Hi, and welcome to the Reuters Institute Global Journalism Seminar Series. Today, we're tracking product development in real time. The Financial Times last month launched FT Edit, an app that gives readers access to 8 articles of in-depth news content every weekday at 8 a.m. It was one of the first major products that FT had launched in about a decade, and it's being led by Malcolm Moore. And we're really glad to have you with us today to talk about this, Malcolm. Welcome.
Thank you.
I'd just like to kind of give a little bit of background. I'd like to know more about how you came to the project, because you were a foreign correspondent in Italy and China, I think, and then you ran the UK news operation and then became tech editor. So could you tell us a little bit about how that evolved into running this app?
Yeah, so I guess when you sit in the tech editor's chair, people start to assume that you know all things about all tech. So maybe that was part of the reason. You know, I'd been sort of on the front line for a number of years, and you know, running a section at the FT. The tech section was also something that I had sort of created. You know, we didn't have it before. We had tech coverage, but spinning out a sort of a new vertical was a new thing for the FT then. So I guess maybe, you know, somebody thought, well, you know, Malcolm's done something new before, maybe he'd like to try something else that's new. And actually for me, you know, new projects are a lot of fun and thinking about how to set them up. So it was a great opportunity.
And apps are kind of a tough place to start. And I'm curious why the FT went for an app rather than a newsletter or, you know, any other product that's frankly easier to set up and sustain and develop.
Yeah, so I mean, I have to say that I was also part of the skeptical camp in that, you know, as for my role running the tech coverage, I know what the mobile app market looks like, and I know how hard it is for news organizations to launch successful news apps, and particularly to build that habit where people come back to your app on a regular basis. I think is just, that's still a thing that I think is a very difficult challenge. Some people have managed it, of course. You know, 90% of the apps market is games. And of the 10% that isn't games, only 2% of that 10% is news. And in that 2%, you have people like Twitter and Reddit. So it's a tough place to be. The reason why we chose to do an app is actually quite straightforward. We had been doing quite a lot of research for a number of years on the idea of a light subscription. So we know that the FT is very good at selling subscriptions to its core audience. We like to call them professional readers. But we've always wanted to think about, are there more people out there who would want to taste some FT journalism, right? You know, we do amazing foreign coverage. We've got great economics coverage. We've got stuff that you know, a lot of obviously we won't call them non-professional readers, but you know what I mean, that, you know, the rest of the world would probably enjoy reading, but what is the right way to get it to them and what's the right price point? So we did quite a lot of work to validate that idea, but at the end of it, we looked at the technology behind our website, and we thought that would be a major piece of work to change the website in order to deliver different versions of the FTs to every individual reader. So we thought what we would do is test the idea in an app first and see if the audience was there. And then if the audience is there, then we could think about what other formats might also be appropriate.
Okay. I know it's only been a month, so the data is quite hard to come by, but what's your instinct about how it's going so far?
Well, I'm just telling everybody internally that it's too early to tell. That seems to be the safe response. You know, we are pretty encouraged by what we've seen. We've had quite a lot of interest, and we haven't started our marketing campaign yet. I think that's going to start in the next week or so. So we've got, at the moment, about 24,000 people using the app. And that's all organic, spreading by word of mouth, which we're quite happy with. I mean, again, I don't know what the context of that is against other news apps or the wider market, but it seems to be fine. But amongst that readership, what's really encouraging is we can see a lot of repeat use. Like we can see that churn is is pretty low, and we can see people coming back to the app every day, and we can see that the people who are using it for a long period of time and are reading it. And our focus groups and customer research are telling us that people kind of get what we're trying to do, right? We were trying to put out there a sort of very focused and minimal reading experience so that people could take some time out of their day, sit down with a cup of tea, and really get to grips with a piece of fantastic journalism. And people are responding to that. So that's very encouraging.
How many of these readers or users do you think are new users, or how many do you think are existing subscribers?
That is a good question, and I don't know the answer yet. We are obviously, existing FT subscribers get the app for free, but at the moment everybody gets the app for free because we haven't, when you download it, you're not asked for any details or anything. We're basically giving everybody a month without even asking them to give us their email addresses. So we don't know who the users are at the moment. But the month comes to an end very shortly, so we will soon be able to see who's willing to pay for this service, and B, whether those people are FT readers or the new audience that we hope they are.
Okay. And talk me through the curation process. Who decides what goes on the app? And
well, there's me, and there's my deputy at the moment, Elizabeth Pears, and between us we read everything, and then we decide the 8 pieces that we want to put in the following morning's edition. It will get more sophisticated than that. Because this is an entirely new thing, we are just setting up our data structures now so that we can see how people are responding to different themes and to what sort of articles people want. I think at the moment we're going with the gut, but hopefully soon we'll be guided by data.
Go on a little bit more about going with the gut. What's your gut instinct? What do you two tend to pick?
So, I think that what we're trying to do is we're trying to provide stories that explain what is happening in the world right now. So this is not an app which is going to give you breaking news. There is no news in the app. But it is an app where if you want to know what is going to happen next in Ukraine, according to our journalists on the ground and around the world, if you want to know, why there is an energy crisis going on, what the effects of, on the food supply chain the Ukraine war is causing, if you want to know, why the Fed is behaving the way it is, then you will come to us for that explanation. So I think what we're tapping in, again, this came out of the research that we did, is that this audience that we're hoping to target are people who are already consuming a lot of news, but feel at the end of their day that they've read a lot of stuff, but it may all be partially reported or politically slanted, or they're not quite sure they understand the kernel of what exactly is happening in a given situation. And we're trying to give them deep, objective, FT quality reporting on the topics that are in the news. So that's the first thing, that the articles should be timely and they should be about what is going on. The other side to it is we're looking to provide, to show the breadth of the FT. The FT, obviously, the brand is known for business and economics journalism, but we have fantastic arts coverage. We have, amazing think pieces. We have some of the best opinion writers around. We've got FT Weekend and everything that is produced there. We've got amazing magazine pieces. And actually, so we're always looking to see, is there something here that's so interesting I would want to share it with my friends, with my family? And that's really the criteria for which, we then put it in the app, right? These are the pieces that I would want everybody I know to read.
And again, I know it's very early, but what struck you? Like what's been an unexpected hit, or what did you think would do quite well? And
so last week we had a piece we put in called "The Divine Tedium of Marriage," which was actually a books review. It was a review about 3 books about marriage, one about how to save your marriage, and another one about a book called Foreverland, which by an American author, which is sort of more realistic take at how hopeless men are and how frustrating marriage is. And I think it obviously struck a chime with our readers because it was far and away the best piece, or most read piece on the day.
That's really interesting. It's often striking how much, relationships, awareness, well-being articles do well on new products.
Well, so I had a chat with a former colleague of mine in the FT who's now running Apple News before we launched, and asked him, what I should bear in mind. And he said, you have to bear in mind that people want to read personal finance, how things are going to affect them, their money, endless property. People love property stuff, and then lifestyle stuff, things that directly relate to them and their world. So, don't put in too many long FT pieces about global economics. Try and put in some more lifestyle-y stuff.
Can I stay on that point? It's a really interesting point about how you build a brand, and what you said at the beginning makes sense. That the ideal aim here would be to get new users and new readers who aren't the professional readers, as you said. But at the same time, the Financial Times, portrays a certain brand and a certain content that does very well commercially and with its subscription model. So how do you balance the two? Because the temptation to get quick wins, whereas is there a concern that you almost end up with two products?
So I think that's a really interesting question, and it's something that we've been thinking about a lot, because we've stuck pretty close to the FT brand with the way the app looks, with the logos and everything else. Like, we want people to know that this is FT quality journalism. But in our focus group testing, we've had a lot of people coming back and saying, I'm really surprised. I'm really surprised by this content, right? I just wouldn't have expected it to be in the FT. This is not what I think the FT is about. And that's cut both ways. People who've been surprised pleasantly, and people who've said, well, I came to the app hoping that you were going to explain, more business stories to me. And there doesn't seem to be enough business in here. So I think that tension is something that we're just going to have to explore as we go, because I think that within the building, we're very open-minded about where this project leads and what shape it takes. But we'll just have to see if the data takes us in one direction or another. We'll just adjust accordingly.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you, really. What would success look like for you here?
We don't have any internal targets attached to this project. I think that the way that the board, who've been incredibly supportive, have put it is just that, the FT is now in a position where we've had, particularly last year, we had, record results, and we've got record levels of subscribers now for the core product. And that has given us the flexibility to be able to say, do you know what, let's just have a sandbox experiment over here and just see where it goes. And so I at the moment, I couldn't really tell you what success looks like. I think that it would be great if we found that quality journalism, accessible quality journalism, this idea that, that people, that because of the proliferation of paywalls, the accessibility of really top quality journalism is getting harder and harder for most people out there. And I think that if we can make some of what we do accessible to a very wide audience, that would be tremendous. And if they then actually liked it and were willing to pay a modest sum for it, that would be fantastic.
That's really good. I'm going to go into the Reuters Institute Fellows seminar room in a moment to get some questions. But just before that, you touched on this slightly. What's been the reception in the newsroom to the app, and also to which stories are selected? Do people want their stories on the app? Has it kind of affected the way people write or frame stories?
So I would say it's too early, and I certainly wouldn't claim that we're affecting how people are going about their work as reporters. But we've had a very positive response from the newsroom, which is interesting to me because, of course, I kind of expect everybody in the building to have read all of the stories every day anyway on the website. But I think it's that the reason we've had a positive response is just that element of curation that applies to them as well as hopefully to the wider audience, which is just, we did some focus groups where people said, I love the New York Times. I've subscribed to the New York Times my whole life. But sometimes when I open it, there are so many stories on the homepage, I don't know where to start. And actually, I think people are looking for a guide, and whether it's this or something else, it's just, what we're offering here is not an endless stream. You don't have to spend all day reading it. There's just 8 things here. And I think that's kind of something that we hope will fit into people's lives. And that's the sort of response we've been getting. Like, journalists have come to us and said, I'd like to see what you've picked before I then go to the website and read everything else, just to see what, your take on what's important today is.
That develops into a culture where it's seen as a win to have a story on the app, and whether people start then,
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, how that works. I'm going to the room because I think this is related to, where, especially your kind of global reach. Hannah, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah. Hi, thank you for being here. I'm curious in terms of reach for the app that you were talking about, and maybe reaching the kind of people who wouldn't be able to afford an FTE subscription, then the choice of going with an iPhone app before an Android app. I'd be curious to hear why you went that way.
Yeah, so obviously it costs twice as much to do both. And we only had limited resource, so we had to pick one or the other. And we decided that we wanted to focus on the UK market first, because that's where we feel that we're the strongest. We are a UK newspaper. But then we felt that our next market would probably be the US. Again, the FT is very keen to convert more US readers, or to have more US readers. And we wanted to try and put a product out there which would be competitive, considering the prices that our US rivals are offering. And the US is absolutely an iPhone majority market. And so that's why we decided to go first.
So it's essentially with an eye to the US market, because in the UK, the price point you're offering with the Edit app Android would make more sense in many ways.
Well, I think even in the UK, the market is 50-50, Android and iPhone. It's only really
levels of the people. I think, Android phones are cheaper and, appeal more to budget conscious consumers.
Yeah.
Thank you. Simon, let me hand over to you, conveniently sitting next to Hannah.
Thanks, Mira. Hi, Malcolm. That sounds like a really interesting experiment. I look forward to seeing how it develops. I'm kind of interested in hearing a bit more about the tech stack, and particularly what sort of capacity it has for interactive or personalized content, and whether that kind of innovation can come from the editorial side as opposed to the technology side.
Yeah. So this is my first experience of working hand in hand with the product teams. And I would say that editorial and product really look at things from almost diametrically opposite perspectives, which has been an interesting experience. But I'm now fully converted to the product way of thinking. Well, not fully converted, but I hope I'll keep my editorial hat on a little bit. But basically what they said was, what we need to do here is to build the very simplest, quickest and easiest thing we can to get it to market. And it's only after it's in the market that we then start to experiment with new features. And we will experiment with those new features depending on what users are asking for. Right. All of these things are kind of antithetical to a journalist, of course, because we're used to not releasing anything into the market until it's perfect, and then we like to actually decide on what the features are ourselves and give those to the market rather than letting the market tell us what it wants. So in terms of, but there are we've had some early feedback, and actually at the top of the list of feedback is personalization. Right, that question of, will this app learn what I like? Will this app learn what I like and give me more of what I like? To what extent is it curated versus the algorithm, choosing stuff for me? And indeed, that's also been a question among early users: is who is choosing this article, and why should I trust them to choose these articles for me? I think that put it, the personalization being the number one request means that it's the first thing that we're going to explore going forward. Where we get to, I don't know, because I'm not actually sure. I think we have to do a lot more work basically on establishing what people mean when they say can you personalize something for me? Do they mean I would like to choose the topics I get and don't get, or do they actually mean I would like to put, an algorithm in control of, say, 50% of what I see? We'll have to find out.
That's really interesting, isn't it? Because it's how much data, to get a totally personalized product, you need to be willing to share quite a lot of your data with
right.
you. And
right.
probably part of what they're coming to you for is the curation service, which would...
that was our initial assumption. Our initial assumption was that actually, there's a kind of a sort of backlash against the sort of Facebook effect of an algorithm choosing everything. And there's a sort of, there's certainly a fear within certain circles of being trapped in a filter bubble and just being fed one type of thing. I don't personally, again, with my tech editor hat on, I'm not afraid of this. Like, I do think that, we can develop nuanced enough algorithms to be able to avoid filter bubbles and other things. But we did think, like, what we're trying to offer here at the beginning is a sort of expert curation. And hopefully that will be popular, but it remains to be seen.
It sounds like your early users don't value that as much as you thought they might.
Well, I think it's just a question of, so many people are used to the idea of some sort of personalization, right? But again, do they really want it to be personalized, or do they want it to seem like it's personalized? Netflix is allegedly personalized, but I'm pretty sure that the Netflix feeds of, the majority of people are very similar, right? I think it's an interesting area to explore. How much does the public expect an app to learn about them? Or do they just, and do they want that? Or is it just something they say they want?
It could just be you were reading about Ukraine yesterday. Would you like to know the next story we have?
Yeah, I've always been slightly nervous about that sort of thing, right? Because certainly, if we look at using analytics to predict our commissioning in editorial, that doesn't work. You can't use past metrics to decide that somebody's going to want more of a certain thing. Otherwise, we'd be writing endless Elon Musk articles.
Exactly. Simon, does that last point address your follow-up question? I think you were talking about personalization.
Sorry, yes. Thanks, Mary. Yeah, I was specifically curious in this instance about personalization of article content as opposed to the article mix. For example, like writing a story about housing, you might want to know the reader's income and personalize kind of the story based on what kind of housing they might be able to afford. That's just an example off the top of my head, but that kind of thing. Is there any scope to that?
That sounds like a great idea. It's not something that I had thought about, but I will now put it down on a piece of paper.
I'll come to Preeti in a moment in your question on international audiences, but before that, Simon, Malcolm, could you tell us a little bit about what's your feedback processes? How are you collecting feedback from users at the moment?
So you can give feedback directly through the app in a couple of ways. You can report bugs, which is obviously the most important thing, and you can also fill in a short survey. We have an email address where people can email us, and people have been emailing us largely about when the Android version is coming. And then we're running sort of what we call diary studies. So we'll pick groups of 10 users and sit them down and get sort of long and detailed interview responses. That's what we're doing so far.
Thank you.
And of course, we can see some data, although our data dashboards are still in the process of being built.
And if you're not collecting much information at the moment off the users.
Yes, we're not. Yeah.
Preeti.
I
think, yeah, go on.
Hi, thank you for this interesting conversation. You mentioned that your current focus is on your UK audience, but I'm wondering if you still have international subscribers, and how do you pick content that is relevant to them?
So the answer is happily we do, and I actually had a spreadsheet of it this morning. So the UK is by far the largest group of users so far, but number 2 is India. and number 3 is the US. And there's obviously the app is available globally. So there are dozens and dozens and dozens of countries actually where people are using the app. It's being used very widely across sub-Saharan Africa and in the Cook Islands and all over the place. So I'm obviously that's great. And what we're hoping in the future is basically to roll out editions of the app for different geographies. So the version that we have now that's targeted in the UK will not be the same version that launches in the US. We'll have a different curation for the US, and then we will then, fingers crossed, if it is successful and it continues to be successful, then roll out. I mean, I think that we're excited about the idea of being able to launch a product in large markets like India at a very different price point, and to be able to vary the price point between places. And indeed, if I was going to be really ambitious, I would say there are only 8 stories in the app every day, so they could potentially be translated into other languages, and that would open up other markets to us as well.
That's a really interesting point and really interesting way of reaching international audiences. It's a very focused way of doing that. Paul, right next to you, your question is kind of related really on expansion.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Malcolm. This is very interesting. So 8 stories a day seems like a very focused and clear offer to your readers, but you did also mention that there might be potential to expand that to something else. What other ideas do you think you could go into in terms of attracting more subscribers somewhere down the line? Would you break away from the 8 sort of stories a day model, and do you think there's potential to perhaps have different mediums such as a podcast day or a Sunday scoop day or something along those lines?
So I don't want to get too far ahead of myself because we're only a few weeks into this project and I don't know how it's going to affect the long-term future of the FT. But I would say certainly we are actively thinking about what other formats people would like within the app. Would they like podcasts? Would they like video? Would they like audio versions of the stories? So, and we have some, the FT has fantastic content across audio and video that we'd like to show off. And indeed, currently, we can't show the best of our sort of interactive visual journalism inside the app, but we're looking at expanding to be able to do that as well. In terms of what other formats the FT could branch into in the future, it's far too early to say, but we have done a lot of thinking around metered access, so you pay for a certain number of articles. We've done a lot of thinking about FT weekend only bundles, about different bundles and so on and so forth. I don't know where that will lead to. I mean, at the moment, it's just the sort of thinking you would expect any news organization to be doing.
Thank you. And I think there's a few questions here about podcasts. If I go to Paula in the room, is that possible? Paula, hi.
Hi, hello. Hi, Malcolm. My name is Paula Molina. I am from Chile.
Hi.
I'd like to ask you about your strategy in audio and specifically in podcasts. I see in the front page of the app you have the 2.2 million new subscribers for Spotify. And I see the podcasts of the Financial Times they have this special section and they are free access. All the text content is under pay. So which is the strategy in podcast and audio in general? Could you tell us more about that?
I'm not sure how much I can tell you because it's not my section. But I think that the one way we think about it is, we have, let's say, 1.2 million subscribers to the core FT products, right? People who are paying, a premium amount of money to be able to access our premium journalism. I think we then have but the FT actually has a much, much wider audience, right? We know there are 26 million people who are signed up to our social media feeds. So we know there are 26 million people who are aware of the FT, know our brand, and might potentially be interested in some of our journalism. And I think that, we've been really encouraged by how popular our podcasts have been. Some of our podcasts have, are in the top 10 charts for Spotify on a regular basis. And I think that speaks to the amount of resource and quality we put into it and the focus that we put into them. And they're a fantastic way of introducing people to our brand and to some of our journalism, and hopefully that they will then want to consume more of it. But I couldn't tell you where we go from here, I'm afraid. That's not my department. Sorry.
That's really interesting answer. We go back to the app and the numbers. Kind of, what are the daily user numbers? You kind of touched on the, people.
Yeah. So they're. I mean, I don't know how important those daily user numbers are, because I'm sure lots of apps are much bigger than ours. But we have, it's been 3 weeks. We've got 24,000 people. The numbers are rising steadily and entirely organically. But from next week, there'll be a marketing campaign, and we hope that we'll acquire many, many more users as a result. Fingers crossed, we'll see.
And what's the retention rate at the moment?
I think after 1 week, we still have 40%, or maybe more than 40%.
Okay.
Which is pretty good, yeah. I mean, I think that the average churn rate for an app is 5% a day. So yeah, we're pretty pleased with our retention.
I mean, again, going back to the kind of product launch, because it's a very lovely way to launch from a kind of very successful editorial newsroom that's done very well commercially and being told, go ahead and play, essentially. We don't, you've got space to breathe and space to prove, to grow, just space to experiment. TP, do you want to ask your question on that?
Hi, Malcolm. Thanks for being here. I'm interested about testing the app before it was launched. What was the audience? How did you test it?
So we, about a month before the public launch, we released it to friends and family. That was a sort of main period for ironing out bugs and getting feedback and making last minute refinements. So we had about 1,000 friends and family users play around with it for a month and tell us very frankly what they liked and didn't like. Before that, we were running, these focus groups that we've run all the way along. So we would just gather together, groups of sort of 10 people, ask them to use it for a week, and then give us feedback.
And these focus groups, kind of, what kind of groups were you looking for?
I wasn't responsible for putting them together, but I think our target audience, the hypothesis we had was that the target audience were, as I said earlier, people who are already very interested in the news, people who are probably subscribed to another newspaper, people, and the audience skewed both slightly younger and slightly older than our existing FT audience. So in our initial testing, we basically found that, it was people in their 20s and 30s who were very engaged in the news and, felt it was a sort of out of a sense of sort of civic duty to make sure they understood politics, understood what was going on, and to contribute in society. That group, and then groups of people who were retired or on the verge of retirement. So obviously our professional readers, if they read the FT because they need the information in there to do their jobs, which is why they're willing to pay the subscription price. This group had sort of moved beyond that stage in their lives, so they no longer needed to know about breaking corporate finance deals or markets news, but they remained very interested in the news and wanted sort of definitive reporting on the key subjects of the day. So those were the sort of demographics that we were looking at, and I suppose we composed people out of those sort of audiences. That's really
interesting, because editorially, I mean, the two things I look at are kind of climate change coverage, where the younger generations are far more interested in it, and also want the reporting to be more definitive and more forceful in many ways than the older generation. And then the issue of how you curate news so people identify with it, as opposed to seeing it as something outside of themselves and impartial and purely objective. And it's really interesting to see how that, it'll be really interesting to see how that curation develops to try and satisfy those markets.
Yeah, well, I mean, we may not be correct about the market. I mean, it would be interesting to see who the actual readers are and what their demographics are. Although, again, you know, we're trying to collect as little data as, well, actually, that's the wrong way to put it. We're not collecting very much data at the beginning.
Yeah. So thank you. Robin, you wanted to follow up from that?
Hi, yeah. Can you explain the price point a little bit more? Because it feels like it's kind of cheap to the point where it's not sustainable. And I'm wondering whether it's, I mean, you've talked a little bit about it, but is it like an exercise in kind of bringing in people in the hope of converting them into like full subscribers? Or is it, you know, trying to build just an enormous scale of people to make it kind of make a bit more financial sense? And is there a danger that you might take full paying subscribers and kind of undercut yourself, basically?
So it's a great question. We've thought about it a lot, as you can imagine. We set the price point where we did because if you think about this as again, this app is trying to answer the question of whether there is a wider and different audience for the FT. Right, we're very comfortable with our existing audience. We know them really well and we know how to serve them. Is there another audience out there who would like FT quality journalism? That was the question we set out to answer. And in order to answer that question, I think we wanted to make the funnel as wide as we possibly could at the beginning. So we didn't want to put barriers. We obviously want people to value the app, but we didn't want to put a barrier that would stop somebody who might be interested in FT journalism from trying it and seeing if they liked it. So that's why we've set it where it is. Sorry, all the lights in my room have gone off because I've been sitting still for too long. In terms of cannibalization, we think that if you are an existing FT reader, and again, you need the information in the FT to be able to do your job and do it effectively, then this app is not going to be enough for you. Right, because essentially there's no news in the app, right? If you need to know exactly what the big move in the markets is today, or what the big corporate finance deal is, or you know what the other sort of exclusive news that we have, you're not going to find that in the app. And so we don't think that people will trade down. And again, the framing of this app and the content in it is really designed for that wider audience rather than, say, for the sort of more specialized current FT audience, if that makes sense. But we are going to be keeping a very close eye to see whether cannibalization does occur.
I think that'll be really interesting to see in the US because in the UK, there's quite an overlap because you're on iPhones only. So I think, you know, the other market is possibly, my strong hunch is they're on Android, and so you're not reaching them. Whereas in the US, like you said, the iPhone penetration is much higher. So it'd be really interesting to see there whether you reach the other.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. I mean, the FT spent a lot of money investing in kind of text to speech. I think it was the Amy project. Is that something you were looking at incorporating?
So experimental Amy is already in the existing FT app. But it's quite hard to find it and turn it on, but it is there. We've actually been looking at, we're doing a project with, I think, Microsoft also on text-to-speech at the moment, which has been, I think, pretty successful. I'm not sure to what extent people are, I mean, I think there are two questions here. The first question is, do people really want to listen to news stories? Because again, these stories are written to be read rather than to be heard. And there is a big difference, I think, between newspaper journalism and radio journalism. And then the second question is, if they are willing to listen to, well, they do want to listen to stories, are they willing to listen to a robot rather than a human? I'm not sure we know the answer to that yet. Obviously, the technology is getting better all the time. But again, with only 8 stories, it's not beyond the realms of imagination that we could hire an actor to read out the stories for us.
I mean, there's an accessibility point here that it's kind of, it works for people who are visually impaired, but I agree that for the rest of the market, there's plenty of news already prepared in the orally in the English language.
Yeah. That is a good point, though. I think that's, I mean, I don't think we've come to a decision yet. And it will depend again on how many people ask for it.
Okay. Yeah, got you. How do you, just going back to you, because do you miss journalism? Do you miss the kind of editorial? Because you sounds like you've taken to, it's like a duck to water, but then.
So I was actually having lunch with someone earlier and just said that it is a very strange experience after, how many 20 plus years of having your hands in the copy, to be sitting at the side of the newsroom as the war in Ukraine unfolds or Elon Musk buys Twitter and not being able to play any part in shaping the output. That is a very strange feeling. But certainly at the moment, I mean, okay, the way I would describe it is I've spent my entire life inside editorial, and it's a box within, the much larger FT organization. Stepping outside of that box and understanding how product works and understanding how our data teams work and understanding how our commercial teams think about things is absolutely fascinating. And I think, just journalistically, it's been fascinating for me to do that and learn about the processes. And I also think these are skills that every journalist should acquire, right? I mean, I do think that I'll speak for myself. The news organizations where I've worked have tended to be quite siloed. And I know we've talked about this a lot within our sector as to how journalists should acquire skills across, other departments. But it really is a huge eye-opening moment to see what is possible and what is not possible and how to go about getting something built and done. That's been really thrilling to be a part of.
Because I would have thought, the part of you that's an editor, that's why I asked about the newsroom culture at the beginning. It's almost like you want to almost play the editor's role by saying, if you write a really good story on Elon Musk and Twitter, I can put it on the app. And that would be.
Yeah, well, there's been a lot of me saying, if only you could build this thing, then that would be amazing. We'd like to make it look like this. Can you just, and without really any understanding of how that functions. And I think now at the end of we're not at the end, we're just at the beginning, but 3 weeks or how many months actually I've been doing this for has really taught me a lot about actually what is the best way of building a product? What sort of things, where can journalists add value into that process? And where should we respect, actually the limits of, well, we as journalists often like to imagine something and try to imagine it into existence, right? And that's not necessarily the way the world works.
Where can we add value?
Well, I mean, again, I think that it's important for those departments to be exposed to what is important for editorial, right? And we have priorities which are built around our understanding of our audience and our understanding of how the news, how the news cycle works and what people want at various times. And I think that being able to give that insight to other people and to say, actually, this is this, and combining that's where you hopefully get to a place where, users will come to something and they'll fall in love with it.
And what do you think what's the converse things? Where do you think you've had to step back and say,
my expectations of how easy things are to do have definitely had to be adjusted. One issue that we had early on, which I'm still not hugely happy about, is the size of the text in the app. Initially, we had initially used the wrong font, and so the text size was very small, and I felt that it wasn't hugely accessible to anyone but the most keen-sighted. And but I kind of thought, well, if we just ask for a bigger font size, all they need to do is to say, show font in X point. No, that's not as easy as that.
Thank you. And you're going to have a marketing plan, a kind of marketing push next week. Tell us a bit about what form that'll take, and again, what your gut instinct is over where it'll land.
Okay, so it's mobile ads and across Google and elsewhere. I couldn't tell you the exact mix of them, but the campaign is built around the idea that there is a trade-off generally between time and depth. So, you can usually only have one or the other, right? If you want to do something quickly, and so we're positioning this app as the kind of sweet spot between those two things, right? You don't have much time every day. You don't have much attention to spend. And we have spent our time curating something which means that you can get very high quality, very deep depth in a shorter period of time. So I think that the catchline for the campaign is time well read. And that's really the message we're trying to get across to people, right? We're not trying to give you a summary of everything that's happened in the world for 5 minutes. What we're trying to give you is, when you have 5 minutes to sit down and read something that is very high quality, here is something high quality to read.
Thank you. I mean, Hannah, you've got a really good question about where this fits in with newsletters.
Yeah. Hi. The newsletter that I get in my inbox every morning is curated by me. I've chosen the topics, and I'm wondering, since you chose to go with in-house sort of editorial curation of this app, is there any experiences from the newsletter that made you make that choice, or how do you sort of cooperate with the newsletter part of the business?
So I think newsletters are a fantastic direct way into people's lives, right? And again, it's a great hack for, instead of waiting for someone to come to you, you going to them. And that's why I think they're such a powerful tool. The flip side is, I now get so many newsletters that I don't think I open all of them. I also have I've downloaded that Substack Reader app. I don't know if you've got it. It's a really fantastic minimal app that, it's a great reading experience. But again, it's very difficult for me to read in its entirety every day. So I think what we're trying to get to is, again, the feeling that where they're on your phone, it's not quite us going to them, but it's one step closer, perhaps, than having to navigate to a website. We're hoping that we'll be able to nudge people into returning using notifications. And in fact, we might even set up our own newsletter, who knows? But instead of a lot of different things and a variety of different topics, and I know my experience is, yes, you curate the topics that you're interested in terms of newsletters, but actually the end result can often feel slightly disjointed, or not related to, the news cycle or to the things that I care about every given day, right? They're related to the huge random selection of topics that the newsletter author is or authors are interested in. And I think that the missing piece there is just that tiny extra bit of curation, right? I'd probably not explain myself very clearly, but that's kind of how I think about it.
Are there ads in the app?
I'm sorry?
Ads in the app?
There are no ads in the app.
And are you going to keep it that way? Or you're not sure?
No. We'll have to find a business model for the app sooner or later. At the moment, I'm living in the promised land of no targets, but I don't know how long it will last for.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, because thank you. That was kind of, I'm getting my phone thinking, getting asked about the future with ads, because I'd imagine at some point you need to figure out where this pays.
Yeah, I think that the first goal here is to see if the audience wants it and see what that audience looks like. Yeah. And after we've established that, then we can start to ask questions about how would the audience like to receive it, pay for it, and so on.
And given that you're owned by Nikkei, and you've talked about expansion, how important is expanding into Japan here, especially when you consider the ways you looked at language? Or where you mentioned India. I was just wondering where else you're thinking of regionalization.
I think everyone in Japan is already a Nikkei subscriber, so pretty much. I would love to do an Asian edition. Whether it would be interesting to see what language we chose to do that in, whether it would be English or whether it would be a different language. I think after the US. Well, look, actually, the way that I think we should think about this is just, where is our content the strongest, and where do we think we have a content offering that is going to be enticing for people, right? And at the moment, that is very much UK, Europe, and the US. But I do think the FT has something to offer people in lots of different locations. I think how we roll out will depend on how strong we can put together a package for those different geographies.
It's also interesting, the point at the beginning about what played well. A lot of what played well is social, cultural, which can be very hard to internationalize. You'd have to be, if you try to personalize that, you really need people who understand those cultures to be doing that curation.
Yeah, absolutely. And we would absolutely have to have regional editions and regional editors and people who really understood what the audience wanted in those places.
Great, thank you. Are there any other last questions in the room that haven't come through on the phone? You just wave your hand and we'll wave at the camera at you. There we go. Who are we going into?
Michelle.
Hi, Chema.
Hi. So you pick 8 articles a day, but the FT produces many more. Isn't there a risk of a reader being frustrated that he's not reading in the app an article that he knows is out there from the FT, but it's not included in the 8 picked by?
I mean, I'm hoping that those people who are so frustrated that they will then pay for a full FT subscription. Sorry, you've gone on mute.
Yeah. So, what if they drop out of the app instead because they don't have the money for the full experience?
I mean, it's an interesting question. We'll have to see what we haven't had any feedback from people so far saying, I tell a lie. Stephen Bush, the political columnist, has a lot of fans out there, and they have been lobbying for more Stephen Bush on the app. And we can, if people lobby for it, we will give it to them. So, we will include more Stephen on the app as a result. I think if people are frustrated that they're not getting a particular sort of content that they really want to see that the FT is providing, then, if they ask for it and we get that in feedback, we will take it into consideration. And then again, further down the line, when we're thinking about maybe more automation, more personalization, that will widen the pool of articles that people that we'll be drawing from.
The Stephen Bush point is really interesting because, his appointment to the FT was kind of, it was a really, really genius appointment because it's always kind of diversifying the political coverage and the profile of, the kind of writers at the FT. And I'm trying to wonder how to phrase this. The FT has done a lot to try and diversify its audience, both in gender and all sorts of demographics. And I wonder how much you see that as part of your mission as well, in terms of looking at untapped audiences, where you're looking at those gaps.
Absolutely. I think it's a priority under Rula, our editor, to diversify our newsroom and diversify our points of view and hopefully reach a wider audience as a result. The first step, so I've been part of the FT is part of the BBC's 50/50 project to try and improve the gender representation in our newspaper. And we have been since the beginning. And I think we might also be the only UK newspaper to be part of it, which is very surprising to me. But anyway, I've been part of that project within the FT since the beginning. And so this app is part of that too, right? We're aiming for a 50/50 balance in the writers that we choose, the images that we choose. And we're now expanding 50/50 beyond gender into ethnicity and ethnicity first, and then other areas. So we will be part of that too.
So
and I think there's the FT has we're focusing on gender because the FT has fewer women readers, and I think another measure of success for this app would be that our audience is both male and female.
Again, you don't have much. Do you have any data on gender split at the moment?
I don't have any data on gender split because we haven't asked anybody for any details at all.
It'd be interesting when you do. Has the curation been 50/50 on gender lines?
Yes.
Consistent, and that was built in from the beginning.
Yes.
That's really
yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Are there any other final questions there? Hannah, is that your hand again? Hi.
Yeah, a very direct question. I'm curious, is this app meant to be a stepping stone to a full FT subscription, or is it meant to sort of tap an untapped market of people who would never be FT subscribers?
Yes, sorry, that's a good question, and I didn't address it earlier. So this app is not about converting people to the full FT. We have no problem in acquiring our existing audience, right? If you are a business person in the UK and you need to have financial news, then you will be an FT subscriber. This app is really about that experimentation of whether there are other people who also want FT journalism, and you know, we're not expecting them to trade up from a £1 a month app to a 99p a month app to a £350 a year FT subscription.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Yeah, I should have asked that as well, because it is a very good point. I think that's all in the room, isn't it? Is that right, Caitlin?
Everyone, thank you.
Thank you so much. Malcolm, thank you so much for giving us an hour of your time. It's
absolute pleasure. Yeah.
In the month that you've launched, I know how busy you are, and we're really, really grateful. And it's been really insightful and really helpful. So thank you, and we will look out for the marketing, and it'd be great to have you back when you've got more data as well on how this is going.
Great, and please sign up for the app.
Yes,
it's a bargain.
Give us an Android version.
We have Regina Cabato talking about climate change, drug wars and elections in the Philippines. And so do please join us then, and with your questions as well. And in the meantime, thank you all very much for joining and for all the input and for the conversation. And thank you, Malcolm. And your lights are going to go off again, aren't they?
Yeah, they've gone off again.
Thanks very much.
Bye now.